they use very explicit definitions to avoid those things being overly broad. The regulations being invalidated as being overly broad.
And one more thing is that I believe that statue is on top of an art gallery. So would that also kind of?
I haven't read. I confess that I really can't bring myself to read a lot of articles about the political candidates right now. I'm kind of.
Did you see that? It was MANA that actually gave the approval. I was just looking for it online, but I couldn't find it. I saw an article that MANA was like, "Yeah, put the statue here because I own this."
The Trump statue.
Yeah, the Trump statue in Wynwood. So it was enough development. It was like, "Yeah, put it here. That'd be awesome."
Really? So bring me up to speed. So somebody made a nude Trump
So
statue.
Moishi MANA
Yeah.
said, well, first he offered to pay Trump $1 million to release his tax returns. Trump did. So, and Mark Cuban just said he'd give him $10 million
For an interview.
for an interview for 4 minutes. He won't. So he said, look, you can put the statue. He encouraged artists to put the naked Trump statue. I think it's like Is Something is the group. Put it on top of
One of his galleries in Wynwood.
Yeah.
But they made him take it down, but he said he's gonna put it somewhere else.
It's on top of a billboard, I believe now.
But
Oh,
the thing
okay.
is, if we're
They
already in New York
moved
City,
to the
in
billboard.
a city department, of course, the city department for park services have to remove it.
Yeah, because of traffic nuisance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there can be, the government can regulate speech based on time, place, and manner. What they can't do is prefer one point of view over another or regulate the content, usually. So nude material, sexually explicit material can be kept away from young people. That's a valid time, place, and manner regulation. Adult nightclubs can be regulated differently than regular nightclubs because there are studies that show that there are more police calls, more drug activity, more violence at adult nightclubs than at regular nightclubs. That's the theory. So you can regulate them more stringently. Now, adult uses, they tend to be regulated in one of two ways. Some cities disperse them. So they say that an adult nightclub has to be at least 1,000 feet or 5,000 feet away from another adult use. So they disperse these uses throughout the community to try to reduce the impact. Some of them have red light districts. They consolidate the uses. They have one zoning district in which these kind of uses can be created, and they zone them all together so that the rest of the area is free of them. Generally you can't do both, because if you limit adult nightclubs to a single zone and you only zone a little postage stamp of land in that zone, and you have distance separations, that means that there's room for one adult nightclub. So that's considered too burdensome. But those are the kind of regulations you'll see. The other way that local governments regulate adult uses is through their ability to regulate the sale of alcohol. Some of them have extensive permitting requirements for getting a permit to sell alcohol, and they use that to try to restrict the number of adult nightclubs they're going to have in their jurisdiction.
I think Oakland Park's going through something now. A
There-
couple of establishments.
I think they had, and I don't know the details, but I think that the club that they're battling with right now was non-conforming, and there was an amortization provision, and now they've gone past. They were supposed to move within some number of years.
My friend owns it, and he owns the other one too. So there's another club like, I said, 1,500 feet from the main. So they move all their activities to the second location, and now they're coming after them on the second location.
I had read that one of the clubs was covered under an injunction
Yeah,
from like the late 80s,
Right.
but that both clubs 15 years ago signed an agreement to cease operation in 2015. And now the time's up.
And now they're reneging.
Well, one of them reneged and one of them moved to the other
it's the
location.
same owner.
like I said, I did this kind of litigation when I was a young lawyer. There's a case called International Eateries versus the Dollhouse 3, and that was the case that I litigated. It went to this, we had a trial in the Southern District of Florida, and then an appeal in the 11th Circuit, and then he tried to, the club owner's lawyer tried to get the Supreme Court to take it, so I filed a brief opposing that. And then when it was all said and done, I really had very little impact on the club actually closing. It wasn't until the Fed started a REE investigation against the owner that they finally closed the
That'll
club.
pretty much shut down.
My zoning litigation, even though I won, apparently had no impact. It took FBI agents with guns before they closed it down. Okay, so kind of keep in the back of your mind, a special concern in zoning regulations is impact on protected activity like speech and religious practice. We're getting close to almost,
Yeah.
let me see how much time I've got. Last topic today, vested rights.
We have more topics after that, you just stopped it right there, right?
Huh?
It's more topics after that, I'm seeing eminent domain.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do eminent domain today. I'm not
Okay,
gonna-
that's not today, okay.
This will be the last topic today.
Okay.
Hmm? Because then I have to revisit my midterm and decide if I'm gonna swap some questions into it that we covered today. I wasn't sure how far we could get today.
Making this midterm to be a challenge.
She said if you listen, you'll get an A.
You believe everything you hear, huh?
I am surprised at what people learn and don't learn. But you know, we all do things. Some of us listening is how we learn. Some of us we've got to write
And listen.
listen. Some of us we've got to read it and you
Right,
you
listen,
it's-
visualize.
You know, if I could make blocks that you could play with and learn manipulatively like a 4-year-old, I'd do that. Okay, so a vested right. There are situations in which the government issues an approval and a property owner acts on the approval, and then the government changes its mind. Okay, that can happen because of politics. One city commission gets run out of office, and there's a whole new city commission, and they feel very differently about the approval that the last city commission made, and they want to change their mind. There are circumstances in which the government can change its mind, and then there are circumstances in which the property owner can be protected from that. If a vested right protects the property owner from the government changing its mind, and that arises when a property owner expends substantial sums and changes its position in reasonable reliance upon the actions of the government, so that it would not be equitable to allow the government to change its mind. And we're assuming that either decision to approve or to deny would be supported under the police power kind of analysis. It's a judgment call. Equitable estoppel is the same idea, but it's from the other perspective. So the government will be equitably estopped from changing its mind if a property owner has expended substantial sums and changed its position in reasonable reliance on the prior approval. So let's think of some examples. There's a tower going up on Las Olas right now, the Icon Tower. You know, it's right next to the Stranahan House historic site, right next to where you guys familiar with the location I'm talking about? Okay, it was the Hyde Park Market. So when Las Olas was starting to develop, there was this grocery store and right on the river, and it became like a prime location. A developer came in with a tower, with a condominium tower, There was extreme objection to it. At some point, the city commission denied the approval and decided to, they got approval for a general obligation bond to spend a certain amount of money to buy the site and turn it into a park. So then they were going to condemn the property with the money that they had approved by a vote of the electors, but it wasn't nearly enough money. So the condemnation was going on, and everybody realized it just wasn't going to be, they didn't have enough money to really take the land. So, and there was changes on the city commission during this whole period, so then they decided, and the property owner sued them over the denial. So they're in negotiations to try to settle the litigation. So in the midst of the eminent domain action to condemn it for a park, I think they decided to reconsider the project approval. And I think they ultimately approved the project, and then I think the downturn happened and the project expired, and I think the project that's being built there right now is a newly approved project. But what happened was that the politics changed. Okay, the code allowed the project got approved because it was within the bounds of the code, they followed the process, but then the elected officials changed, or they came under political pressure and changed their minds, and they wanted to withdraw the approval of the project. This is just an example of how this would happen. Again, if there's a change in the politicians, if there's a change in the community perception, they can look for ways to pull the rug out from under the project. And sometimes they can. There could be, if they found there to be a substantial misrepresentation in something that the developer said or did during the course of the project approval, like they used false data in preparing their traffic study, that could be a basis for them to withdraw the approval and reconsider the project. But if the property owner expends a substantial amount in reliance and it's reasonable, that is, they didn't just call somebody and say, you know, can I do this? Hang up the phone, and they don't know who the person was, and the person had no authority, and they didn't, you know, that wouldn't be it wouldn't be reasonable for a property owner to rely on a phone call to an unknown staff person to find out what they could do. So if they spend substantial amounts and they act in reasonable reliance on the actions of government, then they can probably assert, I have a vested right to proceed with this development, and you, government, are equitably stopped from changing your mind. That's the issue. Now, how many of you have ever done a real estate deal where you had to get an estoppel letter from like a homeowners association or something? Okay, so you're going to buy property, and one of the conditions is that, because it's part of a property owners association, you get a letter from the POA that says, yes, this property is paid up on all of their assessments. That's an estoppel letter. You can request zoning verification letters from cities, but they don't function the same way as an estoppel letter. There's no estoppel involved. They can be wrong. They can be completely wrong, and the city has no responsibility for that. There's no, you can't hold them to it. So you can request a zoning verification letter, and it can be very helpful information, and most of the time they're right. But it's not going to prevent them from saying, you know what, we made a mistake. The line on the map was wrong. So we said you were commercial, but you're really industrial, because the line was wrong on the map. Oops. The city can never be held responsible for that.
So, if they give you a zoning verification letter and it's wrong,
Yep.
then they can stop you?
Sure.
Really?
Yep. And
But not once you expend money on the development, correct?
if you proceed with the development and you spend a lot of money, and let's say they've got the zoning wrong, so you apply for a site plan that's consistent with the zoning, and you're well along the way, and at what point they discover that the zoning, that it was never zoned that to begin with, and your project is not permitted, that's a big factual,
Okay.
debatable issue.
So it's just dependent on
It
where.
is. It is.
Because I'm assuming you have your lenders lined up, you have everything going, you've already expended your time.
And from, you know, I was an assistant county attorney, so I could think like a government lawyer when I want to. And until you get to the point that you've got a final approval and then you expend money, not expending money to get to the final approval, but you spend money in reliance on the final approval,
Right.
that's the point at which I think we might start talking about equitable estoppel.
So
Certainly
basically
not until you
soft
get-
costs prior.
Yeah, I would say no, no. Soft costs to get to a project approval, I would say no, not enough to give you a vested right.
Now, substantial sums, that is objective. Well, it's subjective,
Yeah.
so what is considered substantial sum?
I don't know, I mean, there's a pretty well-known case that happened in Pompano, called the Yard Arm Restaurant case. And it was, I think, to put a restaurant at the Pompano Pier, something around there. And I think they had building permits in hand when the city, withdrew the building permits. So they've gone all the way through development approval to building permit, and the city pulled the rug out from
Is there any recourse or do they give a financial?
And they litigated that for a very, very long time, and ultimately, I think that in one level, the city was, the property owner won some substantial amount of money, and then the city got it reversed on appeal. So the city was allowed to do what it did without financial consequence. So that's what I mean, it's really hard to make a factual case for equitable estoppel. Now, when comprehensive plans were being adopted, and let's say that the use was changed, so you had vacant land that had always been low-density residential, but the comprehensive plan said, you know, it used to be 1 unit per acre, but now we really don't want development there yet, because it would be a leapfrog, so we want to make it 1 unit per 10 acres. They can do that. They can change your, 1 unit per acre to 1 unit per 10 acres when you're just sitting there with vacant land with cows on it. If you only own an acre, maybe not. Maybe you have a vested right to develop something, like a single-family home. But if you own 10 acres and you only get 1 unit when you would have gotten 10 units, probably not.
Is there a time frame that they have to give you in advance or a notification? Like 90 days in advance, you'll know that they're
Well,
changing the zoning?
It's just the normal process for adopting a new land use plan or doing a broad-based rezoning. Usually those notices, most cities do more than what's required.
Okay.
They have community meetings, they have design struts, they use social media, they use websites. But in reality, all they have to do, if they're gonna do a broad-based rezoning, not site-specific for you, just for you, but let's say the whole quadrant of land in the northwest corner of their city is gonna get rezoned, all they have to do is put a display ad in the newspaper.
And it met the requirement.
Yeah.
So no one has sued to define a subjective language of substantial sum?
It's all really fact-specific. It's all fact-specific.
Project
There's
probably.
no threshold. There's no uniform threshold. So that's,
To ruin you, right?
Yeah,
You're broke.
yeah, you spend $1 million, they say, well,
it can be, and there's no, they can't just spend tax money to help private people, so to speak. So from their perspective, private individuals can't structure their business to pick the pocket of the public. You know what I mean? They need to protect the tax money to make sure that it's only used on things that benefit the community. So paying somebody damages for every mistake that their staff might make isn't a good use of the tax money from their perspective.
They should at least
That's a-
fire the staff.
that's beyond extreme there, ain't it?
It's what?
What's on the Scrivener's error, that's beyond that. Scrivener's error, that's beyond.
Oh, Scrivener's errors?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of any examples of small mistakes that can be really costly. And nothing's coming to my head. But it's really just, in a sense, be aware that you need to do diligence. You need to make your proposal correct according to code. If someone in the local government gives you an answer that's just too good to be true, and you know that it's contrary to the code, you just can't take it and run with it, because somebody is going to correct it down the line. And I've had the difficult job of telling a client, they're like, no, I'm telling you, I met with the zoning director, he said we could do this. I'm like, I don't care what he said, his code says otherwise. And you shouldn't hang your hat on that, because he will change he can change his mind at any point. I mean, sometimes it happens with interpretation. There was a zoning director in a city that was looking at, that read the setback regulations of his high-rise zone, essentially, to allow, because it said as you got higher, your setbacks got greater. And he read those to allow a wedding cake, if you know what I'm picturing.
Yeah.
So if you went above the 3rd level, you had an additional 5 feet setback on each side, and if you went above the 6th level, you had an additional. He interpreted it to allow a wedding cake. Well, it wasn't really, it should have been a cereal box, if you know what I mean. If the building was going to be that tall, the setback should have pushed the whole building, not just the building above the level. And it was not super clear in the code. But there were projects approved as wedding cakes, and then he lost his job, and the next zoning director said, no, he's been reading it wrong all along. You can't get a wedding cake design with these setbacks, it's a cereal box. And that's just the easiest way I have to describe it.
So can't you still do the wedding cake now?
No, they eventually went back and clarified the regulations to make it clear that the additional setback associated with additional height was from the ground to the sky.
Okay. No, because I noticed a lot of buildings still have the.
Yep, I mean, and some of them permit it for whatever reason, and the language permits it, but this guy was kind of a pro-development guy, and he wanted to be known that way, but when he lost his job, all these projects, there were several projects in process with the same zoning that they couldn't get approval. They had to redesign to meet the interpretation of the new zoning director.
Okay, so is it a thing to where you get an approval, like you think you got an approval, so, and you spent the substantial sum, and you're starting development, but then somebody finds out it was, that you started that before you were officially approved? Is that like a thing, or no? Like once you
started development before the development approval was final or something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be a code violation. Whether the code violation could end up costing you the approval, I don't really know. I don't really think so. You could stop. You know, if you're not allowed to disturb the land yet because your land disturbance permit isn't final yet, and they cite you for it, you can always stop and wait until your permit gets final.
But it's not a thing to where like it wasn't finally approved yet, you started and they changed the codes and they have a right to be like, no, you can't continue developing.
That could happen if the city can make an argument that this is what we must do to protect the public health and safety. Okay, so it could come up with blasting regulations in areas of like western Broward County where development depended on blasting the bedrock. You could have gotten a plan approved based upon one set of blasting regulations, but you just hadn't started it yet, and they changed the blasting regulations, and that could invalidate your approval. And they could say it's because the public safety requires that we limit blasting more. That's a situation where you could have your permit withdrawn on the basis of regulating for the public safety. I'm trying to think of another example. I had one. when your approval is final. You know, we've talked about being conscious of the expiration date of your approval and what you have, what kind of permit you might have to obtain to become vested, to get that vested right. You need to understand that. One of the other things you have to understand, at least in Florida, is what's called rendition. That the ability of an angry neighbor to appeal it is 30 days after the rendition of the final order. Okay, so what happens if you go to a public hearing, you get approved, you think your 30 days start. Some cities, that paperwork can be kicking around for 10, 12, 15 days before the city clerk renders it. And then your angry neighbor wakes up and realizes that they've missed the time to appeal, but if they argue that it wasn't rendered until 15 days later when the city clerk put her stamp on it, you have an issue. You have to understand, and you'll hire lawyers to do this, to understand when does it really become final. And the lawyers figure it out because they'll get asked by your lender to render an opinion. I've had to write those zoning opinions, and believe me, I don't write that opinion until I know if it's final.
30 days after stamp, essentially.
After the rendition of the order.
So
Which
that,
may be 15 days after the order is verbally given or.
I mean, there was one thing in this, there was,
Order fee, verbally.
one of my partners was involved in a project in Fort Lauderdale where there was a historic designation. They were preserving the facade of the building and redeveloping the rest and putting a tower behind it, and there was neighborhood opposition. And there was litigation where the opposing parties contended that the order wasn't final because it kicked around the city clerk's office for a long time. So, and maybe never became final. There was an election, and there was a new person on the commission who opposed the project, and he actually contended that the approval was never final because the clerk never rendered the order. So I know. Can you believe it? So.
But that really makes no sense because the clerk's not the one that
But the judge-
rendered it. The clerk is just a person recording it. So it's kind of a semantic thing. Like I get it. But
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't.
now, when they misread the code like that, is there any type of insurance for the developer in it for situations like that?
You get a municipal bond or something
To protect you against what?
against changes in regulation. Like, for example, you can do exceptional risk against certain economic turmoil. So,
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. All right. Thank you for your attention. I will be here for a few minutes if anybody has any questions about case studies. We're going to start case studies on October 1st.
and we're going on the 8th, I believe.
We're going to draw numbers. Each team is going to draw a number, and you're going to go in that order. We'll do that. Next week we will do that, and then you'll know what order you're going to present. Can you turn that off for me?